Hello, my fellow seekers. Welcome to Into the Work, therapy for empaths, seekers, and the intuitively driven, where you have front row seats to therapy sessions and expert interviews that will help you define the important work that you're here to do. So I guess you actually have something better than front row seats. You practically have a seat on my couch. That's right, you will have unrestricted access to actual sessions with real people, exploring real life issues. You will continue to be inspired by powerful conversations with experts and healers that might just share exactly what it is that you need to hear to get unstuck. I am Michelle Pauverman. I am a recovering people pleaser and former anxiety-driven empath, turned now mostly grounded psychotherapist and intuitive coach. I have been helping people for almost 20 years manage their limiting beliefs and anxiety to finally stop the self-sabotage and step into their gifts. I created this podcast, Into the Work, to give you a place to learn more about yourself and give you actionable strategies to finally move those roadblocks holding you back so you can go for what you want. Above all else, my hope is that this podcast is a catalyst for your awakening. If you're listening, you've already taken a step towards getting off of autopilot, and our next steps together will be taken episode by episode, waking you up to the possibilities, the new ways of thinking and being, so that you can stretch into that next level of your story. The spark has already been lit, and my friend, this is a journey from spark to brilliance. So together, let's light a fire. Hi, welcome back. Today, Masha, Goins is here to explore how money blocks might be showing up in your life. And just in case you're unfamiliar with the term, money blocks are typically fears, self-limiting beliefs, negative emotions that stand in the way of your financial success. But they are tricky because many times they are negative subconscious beliefs about money that block your success around creating wealth. For example, if you are somebody that outwardly wishes for money, maybe you work really hard for it. The fact deep down you have a belief that having a lot of money would make you greedy keeps you from really accumulating money. Make sense? So Masha is here today to open your mind up about some of the underlying beliefs and blocks you may not have considered to be the culprit to your own money issues. Masha is a dream midwife, abundance activator, aka business coach and money mindset queen, and the host of the Money Mindset Mama podcast. I myself have been working with Masha in her group coaching program, K to 100K, along with an incredible group of women exploring entrepreneurship as soulful service. Masha provides beautiful support, pushing us past our comfort zones and our money blocks while also serving with integrity, right? No sleazy sales tactics there. And I really appreciate that. So I am really excited to bring her on. She is a wealth of information on so many different things. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, Masha. Thank you so much for coming to the show. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Michelle. I am so excited to be here and to have this conversation with you. I can't wait.
Yeah, this conversation is one that I get asked about a lot. And of course, the way that, the universe works, as soon as I scheduled this with you, I have had a bombardment of people who have come to me like, I'm having this issue. What do I do? And that is, I am having issues with money, expansion, putting myself out there, but it's all kind of combined into one thing. And so I'm really excited to talk about how us sensitive types, our empathic types, well, many of us, I'd say everybody, but many of us have these money blocks. And maybe you could just kind of kick us off by talking about what money blocks might be, what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I agree with you. I think it's actually everybody. I mean, every single female entrepreneur, because especially I see them amongst women, but I think that men have them as well. But I primarily work with women, and I think that we're so socially conditioned, like our social conditioning and our patterning is so strong that it comes up in so many ways, and we don't usually realize that it has anything to do with money, right? So it is really at the bottom line is that it is fundamentally about our self-worth
Yeah.
and how we perceive ourselves and how we value ourselves. And most of us have such a low sense of self-worth, and that it's really shocking. You start talking to highly accomplished women who are, have qualifications up the wazoo and are doing incredible things and have successful businesses and have done so many things that are mind-blowing, and
Mm.
still they doubt themselves. So they don't believe, they think that somehow it happened accidentally or they were really lucky. They constantly apologize for their success, and they just, oh, it just happened. And so yeah, I think it's really all pervasive. And for those of us who are not business owners or entrepreneurs, it takes us some time to realize that this is actually related to money, because we're not having to put ourselves out there in the way of, selling something or asking for something.
Yeah, and yet it's still happening. I mean, especially if you're not a breadwinner, especially if you're somebody who's at home, kids, or somebody who's not working and you're not the primary person bringing money in, I think it actually can cause even more glaring issues because money equals power, money equals worth. That you're right, right? And so there's that whole sense of like powerlessness that can come with not having access to money or not feeling comfortable even asking for it or whatever that looks like for people.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that, historically, that's why we struggle with this so much, because the domestic unpaid labor of women has been the thing that has kept our societies and our communities together and that fuels our economy. And yet we don't value it, right? Even
Mm.
though we couldn't survive as a society without it, because we don't associate value to it and it's unpaid. Therefore, intrinsically, we view it as less than, right?
Yeah.
So let's say the partner goes to the office, he is making money, he's bringing home the bacon, and that's more important than the stay-at-home spouse who is, working nonstop all day and probably having a much more complicated and challenging job at home doing this, but is not getting the validation or the acknowledgement or, of course, the value, the valuation of it.
Yeah, 100%, right? We just don't value it. And so, what I hear you saying is like, if a culture, we don't value it. But I also just feel like, and I think you're saying this as well, is that intrinsically, even within ourselves, we have a hard time valuing it because we've been trained and ingrained, right? To see our worth through different things. I don't know if you read that book, Worthy. Have you heard of Jamie Kern Lima wrote it?
Yes, I love her. I love that
Yeah.
book. It's so good.
I just was like, I just opened it up because I haven't read it yet. And I just bought it not long ago. And there was a quote as soon as I opened the page. And of course, we're talking today about this. And I opened up the book and I opened up the page. And the quote there was basically said, you don't soar to the level of your hopes and dreams. You stay stuck at the level of your self worth. And I just felt like that is such an incredible quote for what we're talking about here with these money blocks that we have. And I love how you pointed out that a lot of us don't even realize that they are money blocks. I mean,
Yeah.
layered, they're self-worth blocks, but we may not even be aware that these are the money blocks that we actually have. So,
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that, I read her first book, I realized, and Believe It, which I loved. I have
oh,
to read the
yes.
second one because it sounds really, really good. But I think that, part of it is that we associate worthiness with productivity.
Mm.
And if we're not productive, right, because we live in this toxic hustle culture, right, where hard work equals success, hard work equals value, we associate value and self-worth with productivity. So, if you're just this lazy stay-at-home mom, just resting and reading a book at home, that is not productive, right? If you're scrubbing the floors and you're doing a million things, then, oh, okay, but actually you get to do it from home. So it's not really a job anyway, right? So our it's so dysfunctional, our relationship with ourselves and our idea that in order to be worthy, we have to be productive when we are intrinsically worthy, right? When we are actually divine beings, and worthiness is an abundance, our birthright. Just by existing, we're worthy. And yet we run around in circles trying to find something to do to make us feel worthy.
Right. Yes. Amen. Yes. I actually say to women a lot, and I say, if you worry, if you're curious, if you have issues with being busy and being attached to your worth, I want you just to tell me when you're laying down on the couch for a moment and no one's around, maybe pick up a book or you just do whatever you do. When your husband walks in the room, do you jump? Can you sit there and continue the same behavior, or must you change it immediately? Right?
My God, that is so good. Michelle, that is so good, because literally this morning I'm reading like a really juicy fantasy romance right now. And I stayed up way too late last night reading. And then this morning I was like, well, I have to complete this chapter while I have my breakfast, because during my breakfast time, it's not productive time anyway. So I went outside on the deck, but then my husband came out and I was like, this is like
ruining it.
I know. I'm like, you're ruining my totally self-indulgent, non-productive moment right now, because my workday has technically started. The kids have gone off to school. I'm not working out this morning, so I can do some very important work. And here I am reading my book.
Yes, totally. I mean, self-respect really appears as selfish, right? And like, I think you're respecting yourself by giving yourself that extra chapter, right? Like, you're just doing what it is that you desire in the moment. And we're here to want and create and do things that make us feel good. It isn't all about push, push, push. But let's talk about money blocks, because I know that some people who are listening are going to be like, oh, let me tell you what my money blocks are. And then there's going to be some people that are like, I don't know. I don't know what my money blocks are. Maybe we could talk a little bit about what some examples are that you've come across. I can share mine.
Yes, wonderful. Okay, so the first thing usually that people have when it comes to money is this feeling of like, I can't afford that, right? It's like the immediate no, like, oh, I really would love to buy that, but it's not in the budget. We can't afford it. We don't have enough money. I don't have enough money. And that feeling of not having enough, never having enough, really stems from this feeling of not being safe, right? You don't feel safe, and you don't have security. And I know multimillionaires who feel this way, literally, who live in like, a $15 million home and feel like it could all disappear at any given moment, and they don't feel safe, right? So that feeling of safety is something that they keep trying to amass or accumulate more money to get that feeling of safety and security. But that feeling of safety and security is actually something that we have within us, right? That we can tap into and access. And it's not brought about by external validation or even by the energetic, receiving of abundance.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. There's so many ways, like, I love that you said it's unsafe. And just like a little plug here for those of people that are, energetically inclined, that, money really is a first chakra issue for lots of good reasons, because it's all about safety and security and belonging. But when we look at money, we also have a lot of guilt around it, like one of my aha moments, there's lots like, there's lots you hear like, oh, money grows on trees, like money doesn't grow on trees. So it's, like you said, it's that lack of abundance, it's scarcity. But for me, one of the things that really hit me was when I realized that I truly deep down, not totally at the surface, but deep down, I truly had a belief that if I made more money, if I became rich, if I started becoming this person who made a lot of money, that I would be adding to the imbalance of poverty in the world. That me making money was somehow taking it away from somebody else. That somehow that energetic exchange of me getting bigger and someone else not, that I was somehow responsible and made me a bad person. Does that make sense? So
yes. Yes, of course. It's like the whole starving artist trope, because in order to be pure, creatively pure, and to be a good person, you don't want to be tainted by money. You don't want to be corrupted by money because money is greedy and money is selfish and money is evil and it corrupts people. And I used to do the same thing. Like, actually, my thing was that I would never date anybody with money because I'm like, if this person has anything to do with Wall Street, I want no part of it. Like, if they're, if they've got money, then they're going to try to control me with that money. It's just
Yeah.
like this fear of control. So I was like, let's just always go for the rebels and the artists, and not go for the accountants, or etc. So it's so interesting. It comes up in who we date and who we surround ourselves with and how we perceive other people. Like, oh, those wealthy people. Oh, yeah, must be nice to be rich. Like these little, they've got nothing else to worry about, or rich people problems, right? So this is something my husband says. It drives me bananas because he says this every time, like I'm watching some period piece, like Downton Abbey or something like that, or Bridgerton, right? Which is such a throwaway, like fun, farcical, like fantasy world. And he's like, oh, another period piece about rich people problems, right? And I'm like, Bill, like, I'm like, can we talk about this for a second? And like, he's really into talking about like all of this stuff, but he understands that came from his upbringing and of his family telling him that, rich people are frivolous, right? They are wasteful. They are X, Y, Z. And whereas the poor working people are the ones who are, they save every penny and they work harder. And, we have all of these like narratives in our mind, all of these stories about what people are like, depending on how much money they have.
100%. People have such, almost sometimes I've even come across anger. I have a friend of mine that has this beautiful Cape home on the water. Now, her husband works to the bone for the things they have. And that also just is who he is. It isn't because, that he feels he has to and keep his money. I think this is who he is, right? He just is here to create and produce and build big. And they were having this beautiful time. They had gotten back to go spend time at the water after a very stressful week. And somebody was walking by on the beach and they were trying to like use their chairs or something happened. And these people got enraged at them immediately and made comments like, must be nice, trust fund baby, and made all these comments. Wow, like you could have used that as a emotional moment because you were just so in your own fight or flight, when that happened. But those type of conversations need to happen. This conversation needs to happen more for people to understand that having that mentality, believing you're a victim in it somehow, having anger towards people with money, to believe these things, it just creates such pain. It just keeps you from being able to experience the joy of it all, right?
Exactly. And interestingly enough, maybe it isn't so nice because according to the statistics, the levels of joy and happiness that people have, they peak at around, like, I think when people make like $80,000 a year and then they go down, right? So the wealthier you are, based on studies that have looked into this, your, concept of being happy and joyful does not go up, does not scale proportionately to how much money. Like, it just peaks when your needs, your basic needs are met. And the rest is you, I guess, then worrying that you need more or you need to bring in more in order to sustain a certain lifestyle, etc. And you have different layers of stress. So yeah, it's amazing how we judge people, and we judge people without even knowing anything about their financial situation because you really have no idea, and if you're a business owner, this happens all the time with my clients, that they judge like, oh, my audience can't afford this. Like I have a high ticket group coaching program, but they can't afford this. They can't pay for this, right? And it's like, but how do you know that, right? Because everybody's going to tell you they can't afford it. That is just like, everybody thinks they don't have enough time and everybody thinks they don't have enough money. But the reality is everyone is spending money on the things that they want to spend money on, right? So it's like we project our own stuff onto other people all the
Yes.
time.
All the time. All the time. And in fact, one of the things I heard you say that has stuck with me is get your head out of someone else's purse strings, right? Like that is not your business. It's not my business. I mean, one of the things I want to say, since we're talking business, just came up, but I believe that when we talk about like kind of being soulfully aligned in your business, some people are like, what does that even mean? Right. And so one of the things I like to say is I really feel like that soulfully aligned place is when you take somebody who's just got this beautiful gift and it is, your soul is summoning you, right? And you're just going with where you're summoned. And that person comes around and they have a need and you come together. And, it's beautiful because both people are receiving. And I know we're going to talk about receiving a bit and their blocks with that. But I feel like that's how we can get behind understanding that we're serving, if we're here to serve, right? And that piece of that, the money blocks that come up for us, if we could put them aside and understand that we're following our gifts. Money is the exchange of energy that helped these two people. One who has this summoning soul, right? Soul purpose, and the other person who has a need. And the money is the balance in between the two so that both receive. And aren't we
Exactly.
here to both receive, right? Everybody should be receiving.
Yes, but you nailed it. I mean, that's the crux of it because money blocks are receiving blocks.
Yes.
And so for some people, they are aware that they have like a dysfunctional, complicated relationship with money, and others notice it more in their inability to receive, right? Okay, so an example of somebody gives you a compliment, like somebody compliments my dress, and I'm like, oh, this old thing, I found it in the warehouse sale. It's like worn it for 30 years. It's falling apart, like I can't just receive your compliment without qualifying it, diminishing myself in the process.
Oh,
And women do this all the
all the
time,
time.
right?
Yes.
Like, oh, I love your hair. It's like, oh, I just took a shower. I just
Right.
washed it. Can you just say thank you? Right? Like, oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And my children are actually my greatest teachers with this. It's amazing having little girls and they have no filter. So they'll say things like, Mommy, your tummy is so soft. And, why are your boobies, like saggy? And I'll be like, well, thank you. And I frame it in a compliment, right? And I'm like, thank you for that observation. Let me explain why. Instead of like, oh, yeah, it's because you took the life out of me and stretched my tissue and my
Right.
skin for years. And I'm
Right.
never going to get my perky body back. No, it's like you have to receive. And in order to receive, you have to be aware that you're blocking that receiving, right? You're blocking that receiving by immediately, like if you have a child, it's a great example. Like your child will say something, give you a compliment when you're not looking your best, right? This happens to me every morning where I'm like half
nice.
awake. I'm like in my bathrobe. I mean, hot mess. And oh, mommy, you look so pretty. Or mommy, you're so lovely. Come give me a hug, right? And instead of saying like pretty, I don't look pretty, like instead of diminishing or saying something that's like body negative, which is the narrative in my head because I'm female, right? We all have these automatic negative thoughts all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I actually say like, thank you, you know? Like I'll just say thank you and I'll receive that compliment. And it feels very unnatural and uncomfortable to say that.
But really, really good for you and your soul. I mean, really good practice and such a good message that you're giving to the girl. But even just for all of us to hear that right now, that take an exercise from this book, right? Go out into the world and, try to see how you can absorb every compliment you get. See how you can shift in any way that you're receiving. Actually, I sometimes have my clients do receiving journals. So I'll say, okay, so what I want you to do for like a week, if just do it for a week, if 'cause some of us, especially us ADD types, we're not great at like consistency. So I'll say just at least for a week if you can. If it's 3 days, fine, great. But just take a day and write down every time you receive something, whether it's a text message, whether it's an email that's a compliment, whether it's something simple. I have done it myself, and I've gotten to noontime with like 7 different things, and I would have never have paid attention to how much I just received.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah,
know?
that's such a powerful exercise. I love that you do that because it's true. We don't, and often we're resistant to it, and because it feels uncomfortable. The spotlight is on us. We want to move it away. And like I just launched my podcast and I've been getting a lot of really positive feedback and support, and it's so uncomfortable to receive it, even though I'm really excited that people like it. But then I'm like, okay, thank you. Let's change this topic now. I don't want to keep, like, yes, I'm so great and my podcast is so great, but the thing is that we're just so wired to immediately try to put it down. It's sort of like the apologizing for ourself, right? Sometimes I was in this cafe and I watched this woman and she came up to the counter and her first 2 words were, "Hi, sorry." Right. And I'm like, why are you saying sorry? This person is there to serve you, right? That their job is to serve you. And you are apologizing for taking up space, just physical space. Like we're constantly apologizing for that.
Constantly apologizing for that, for existing in some way. I mean, some of us definitely worse than others. I was notorious for saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. One time someone did we were doing kind of skits on each other at work and somebody did me and they literally just apologized over and over again.
Oh my
I was like,
gosh.
oh, okay. I get it. I got the message. But I don't want to glaze over this receiving piece too much because I really believe that when we said we were going to talk about this and you brought up some ideas and you had mentioned receiving, it really feels so powerful that people understand the actual importance of this. That after walking away from this podcast episode, if you take anything, it's that I'm going to really work on receiving because I really believe it's so important. Actually, there was this quote I once heard that I loved, and it was something like, that receiving is for the soul what food is for the body, and it's nutrition. And we're starving. Us empaths and sensitive types, I think we're starving, right? Like we're just so hungry because we're constantly overgiving, giving it away, like trying not to receive too much, trying to not be too much. So I feel like this receiving piece is such like you said, money blocks are a receiving block,
And then when we do receive a compliment, let's say from our spouse or partner, then we automatically qualify it. Like, why did he notice it on that night, but not on that night, but
Right,
what was I
right.
wearing? And no, actually, I don't like what I was wearing. So that's not a full compliment, like we can't just receive it purely without trying to find fault in it somehow.
Yes.
Right? There's some kind of fault.
And even like letting that expand a bit, like anything that you endeavor, whether you're somebody who's like an entrepreneur or you're a business person or you are a creative type and you want to get into your art, I feel like, and I have read this is not mine, but like I've come across this enough to be able to regurgitate it now, and because it's powerful, and that is just like the level of which you can receive is going to be how successful you can be at almost most things, because putting yourself out there and being vulnerable is about receiving too,
Exactly. And it's really hard for us to receive without reciprocating as well.
Yeah.
Right? It's like we
Yes.
think like, okay, well, it's tit for tat, right? So if you're going to give me a 5-star rating on my podcast, I'm going to give you a 5-star rating on your podcast. But just asking without saying like, what can I do for you? What can I do? How can I help you? How can I support you? It's really hard when you're a nurturer, right? It's really, really hard, and it's an uncomfortable thing. And I think that ask, that's why when we struggle, when we're empaths or, hypersensitive or intuitive, we're trying to build businesses, we're trying to create something, the ask part is so difficult. The selling is so difficult because we just we don't want to ask. We don't want to take up space, and we feel like we're placing a burden on other people by making that ask, when actually, if we don't receive, then our energy is just being drained constantly. Then we're just basically surrounding ourselves by energy vampires, right? Because we're not getting anything back.
Yeah. Yeah. It's challenging. So, I mean, if you have grown up this way and your family was this way, and, you were taught, when I was younger, I remember going to visit my grandparents, and I was literally taught to say, they would offer me money for the candy store every time we went. We didn't go all the time, and I was trained to say no at least 3 times before I accepted the money. And so I'd say no, and then they'd say, no, take it. And then I'd say, no, my mother would be proud. What a good girl she's raising. And so just that programming in itself of like, I was trained to say no multiple times before I could say yes.
Wow.
Right. And then I think for some of us, I think a lot of us will resonate with this, is that we don't want to owe anybody anything either. Especially as over-responsible people. If you are someone who's over-responsible for other people and over-giving and all those things, I think we struggle with the immensity of feeling like we owe people. So if I receive something, like if I took that money, am I going to owe something later? Or, I'm going to, they're up on the totem pole of power because they gave to me last, right? Such an interesting exchange.
It is. It really is. And the thing is that, with receiving, you are nurturing yourself, right? And when you're selling, you're serving your people and you're receiving the energetic exchange. And when you receive the energetic exchange, and this is the thing, giving is so powerful. Like, giving is my favorite thing, right? I love to give gifts. I love to give compliments. I love, it's the thing that brings me so much joy. And we forget that because we are so resistant to receiving. We forget that people like to give as well. And when you're taking away their joy of giving, when you're like, oh, no, I don't want that. And it's like, no, but I want you to have this. Like, this is my gift to you, like, this is really meaningful for me. And here you are like, I can't, it's too much. And so we do that with our friendships. We do that all the time with things. Somebody who takes us out for lunch or, dinner, or, we're constantly like calculating like, oh, is this too much? Am I taking too much? So it's really hard for us to just be in a state of receptivity and just open.
Yeah. What's making me think of when you say that too is it's the same thing. And it's how difficult it is for, us as space holders. Us empaths tend to be space holders. We love to make space for other people. It kind of becomes, I call us the wisdom keepers. Like, everybody flocks to you because you hold the wisdom. But receiving in the relationship means letting somebody else hold the space for you and being vulnerable and being a mess. And letting somebody else have the opportunity to help you, to be there for you, to shine as the helper. And we really struggle with that a lot, I think, in our relationships and stuff in terms of receiving. And and sometimes we're just like, I can't talk to anybody because they won't be good enough listeners for me. But I feel like, the whole receiving piece, what you're talking about, also expands out to like, even just, can we allow other people to just hold space for us? And that in itself is receiving,
Exactly. Yeah, because especially if we're so used to, doing it ourselves and just kind of slugging through life on our own and not sharing our burdens and our problems on others to try to minimize the heaviness of it, but carrying everyone else's stuff on top of our stuff, right? And then we become this little donkey with like all of this weight on our shoulders, and it's too much.
So I think understanding that receiving is a block as well. It is money and receiving are similar blocks. So focusing on also helping with your
receiving blocks can kind of help you with your money blocks, but also understanding with the money blocks that, because a lot of people ask me, so Michelle, what do I do about this? This is just, I've been living this way my whole life. How do I change it now? And I think that people get really frustrated because they set out to do these big things, like start a business, do this thing. And their energy can't, their nervous system can't keep up. It can't, right? Because the money, if you believe underneath it all that people who have money are, all the things we talked about, greedy or not nice or whatever, it's going to get in the way of you being able to move forward and expand. It's going to get in the way of your nervous system's ability because it's not really what you want then. If you believe that people who have money are bad, then you don't really want money, and you have to want money for it to come to you, right?
Bingo, 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 because that's the thing. And that's the fear of success part, right? Because oftentimes we're like, oh, yes, I get it. I have a fear of failure because, I'm an overachiever and I always have to be like the good girl, the smart girl, But the fear of success is actually realizing that, it's scary, the idea of you actually being financially successful and having something and being one of those rich, wealthy people based on something that you built yourself, not based on, marrying into it or inheriting it, is deeply uncomfortable because you think somehow it's going to change you. Like that added responsibility is going to and I sometimes I push my clients to say, what do you fear is going to happen if you are really successful with this? What's going to happen? Like, what's going to change? And then it's sort of like, oh, well, that means I'm not going to be able to do this, or I'm not going to have time for this, because our concept of success is usually rooted in what we saw as we were, growing up. And in my case, success was my dad leaving at the crack of dawn and not coming home until dinner time, and having a tiny sliver of time with him during the work week, and thinking that in order for me to be successful, I too have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, work out for an hour, and then just, grind away until I collapse into bed at night, and that's life, that's what success is. And I have to wear a suit while I'm doing it. So it can't be me just cross-legged on the sofa at home, barefoot, having tea. That can't be success. Surely not.
Right. And so you could see these opposing energies when you're trying to strive to be something you don't really want, because that's not the image you want for your life, right? But if someone like yourself said, hey, you can do the same success with sandals on from home and live this life, right? Then we might feel differently about it, I suppose. But it is that underlying beliefs. And as listeners, for everybody to kind of check in with what did I know? What did I learn from my parents? What was the messaging? What did I see? How do I equate that with what that would mean for me to have money and what I would need to get it? And do I even want it? Am I safe wanting it? Is it safe to want money?
Yes. And what do you have to sacrifice, right? What do you have to, because we always feel like, okay, well, success comes at a cost. What's the cost? When is the other shoe going to drop? What bad thing is going to happen when I actually get the thing that I want, right? I mean, that's so rooted in all the fairy tales and you get this dream life, if you sell me your soul, all of these kind of. And for me, it took me the longest time to realize that I had this really deep-rooted fear of success, because I thought I don't want to be that parent that wasn't there. And that if I'm successful, then that means that I'm not available to my children and my spouse. And so it's either or, our mind just goes into this binary dichotomy and just can't, but now we're in such a different place, especially if you're an online entrepreneur, and which is why we both have chosen this path of freedom, where it's really the threshold of limitless potential, especially for women, who are now able to, just with their own creativity and ideas, create abundance from home, right? It is mind-blowing. If our grandmothers knew that how is this possible, right? It's so
incredible.
cool.
It's incredible. I cheered along as I watched stories during the pandemic of a woman who taught a piano class online, and she made $80,000 in like a week selling these piano classes, right? There's such opportunity now, and can we have it? Can we allow it, right? Can we allow that for ourselves? And one of the things that you talked about bringing up is the sister wound. And so as we're talking about this, kind of looking at other women, and there's this whole shift that's happened, and I'm sure it happened before, but I'm sensing it now a lot, from competition to collaboration, right? Really try to look at it as my soul wants to collaborate. It doesn't want to compete. And as soon as competition comes in for a lot of us, especially as empathic types, we can fold, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or we can feel really overwhelmed by that because of our sensitivities. And so I think understanding the sister wound would be kind of cool to hear you talk about a little bit.
Yeah, so I think absolutely. I think it ties into what we were just talking about, really, that we can do this, the idea that we can do this. And what that means, though, is us allowing ourselves to shine our light, right? To like really rip that lampshade off that we have been carrying around, because we dim our light, like ever since we were, socially conditioned to be that good girl, to be quiet, to be well behaved, not to take up space, not to be like your brother, right? Not to be the loud disruptor. We are subdued. We take up less space. We don't want to outshine other women. We don't want to outshine our friends. We don't want to be extra. We don't want to be the demanding, and it's really cool to see how Generation Alpha now is growing up with all of these female role models that we didn't have when we were growing up. I'm assuming we're a similar age.
Mm-hmm.
But when, and it's really amazing to see how, like, I went to see the Barbie movie with my two girls who are 8 and 10. And my daughter was like, I don't understand, what were they thinking? What was Ken thinking? It's Barbie's world. Why is he even, there was way too much shirtless Ken in there, and she was 7 at the time. She's like, I didn't like shirtless Ken. He was not supposed to be in Barbie land. And that other bad place, that fantasy world, that was a horrible place. And I was like, what is she talking about? She's talking about reality, like the real world. And I realized at that moment that my 7-year-old was living in Barbie land. Like, she literally thinks that, her potential as a girl is unlimited, that she can do anything, that she's surrounded by strong female role models. She has a female doctor. She has a working mom who has her own business. She has all these girl power books. And I was like, oh my God, how am I going to tell her that real world is actually the patriarchy? That it's really real. Isn't that wild?
Yes, you don't want to break her spirit.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think there is a big move towards healing the sister wound and creating that Barbie land. And, the Me Too movement started bringing that in, where we started to really see that, we have to support each other. We have to listen to our stories. We have to believe each other, because we're not debutantes. We're not leftover debutantes in Bridgerton vying for the same 5 guys anymore, right? We have, society has evolved, and we don't have to compete, right? We had to compete because we had, again, no value of our own unless we were tied to a male. We couldn't even own property, right? And so our very survival depended on us securing safety and security in the form of a man.
Do you know that when I was in college, I did this massive research paper, and it showed the transition of witches burned at the stake to women, to the buildings being built of institutions and women being dropped off. It is literally like weeks apart. It was like the shift went from burning women at the stake and then moving them into institutions. And it was fascinating to see how this just kept going, this whole entrenched, what you're talking about.
Yes.
Right? And that is our history.
It is. And that's actually, you're touching upon the witch wound, right? Which is something that we also have all inherited, right? If we're female, that feeling of it's not safe for me to really speak what's on my soul and on my mind, because it wasn't safe for so many years. It wasn't safe in any way to stick out, to be different, and to, share your authentic self. That we were persecuted for that. And the sister wound is closely tied to that because, every time you had a friend who was rejecting you, or you felt excluded, or there were mean girls who made you feel like you weren't a part or you didn't belong, we have these micro wounds every single day, right? It happens as grown-ups too, right? There's a dinner and you weren't invited, right? Or somebody's birthday celebration and you see the pictures on Facebook and you're like, oh, okay. So that sister wound is constantly being triggered and activated over and over. And this feeling of like, oh, I don't belong. Do I belong? Where do I belong? And who's really there? Who's really there in my sisterhood?
Yeah. And who is really trustworthy? Where basically it all comes again down to safety, right? Who am I safe with? Yeah.
Exactly. And because that's the thing is like, and social media is just so, such a terrible thing in terms of triggering all of these wounds, because we see, we don't have to be scrolling for very long before we suddenly are comparing ourselves. And we're comparing ourselves to things that are not even, alike. They're not even alike. Like we're comparing ourselves to someone who's not even doing what we're doing. We're comparing our home. We're comparing our style, our fashion, our hair, like all of these things. Suddenly your mind starts going into this place of comparisonitis, or what I call comparisonitis, where it's just like this virus, like we can't stop doing it. And we always fall short. Right?
Yes. And so it would be kind of cool for us to chat it for a minute about like, okay, so that's all true and a little overwhelming. And so what do we do to heal this, right? It's like, how do we step forth and stop the comparison and stop the sister wound and start receiving and start moving into our power, right? That is safe in a safe way.
Yeah, I think exactly, because it does feel overwhelming, especially if you're new to these concepts and you're like, oh my gosh. Well, the first thing I always say is like awareness. When you become aware of these patterns and you notice the next time you feel that you're receiving a compliment and you're about to say, oh, this old thing, or whatever, just notice like, oh, here it goes again. I'm doing it. Or my partner is giving me a compliment and I am about to qualify it, become aware of that next time you're on social media. Notice, like, is it actually making you feel good or is it not? And if it's not making you feel good, why are you doing that? Why are you like seeing, right? You can mute, you can unfollow, you don't have to see it, but you can also just create boundaries for yourself, for your mental and emotional health. So for me, like I have to delete my social media apps every weekend unless I'm launching, because it's just too much for me. Like there's too much. And I notice it. If I am on social media more, I notice the heaviness, that feeling of heaviness, that no matter how good I'm doing, how successful I am, it's not enough.
Yeah. I love so much how you just unfolded that right there. And in the very beginning, what started it all was this idea that start observing. And so I tell people like, start building your inner observer. Because like right now, as you're listening to us or as you and I are talking to each other, I can also simultaneously watch, right? So I can pay attention to what are my hands moving as I'm talking to you. And so I tell people to like build that inner observer. so that you can actually watch what you're doing, pay attention and go, stop that, knock it off, or, start creating some discipline in your life to contain yourself for your own well-being, right? One of the things that I do like to always plug in too is that language is powerful. So how we talk to ourselves, like the language we use, if you want to change your life, we have to change our stories. We have to change how we talk to ourselves. If we can change the way we think about things, then we'll change our behaviors. We'll change, we'll be able to make changes. But if we live in this place, well, I suck, and we allow those stories, the ways that we think to just take over, it's really hard to change the behaviors. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
That makes sense?
absolutely. No, it makes perfect sense. I feel like you summed it up so accurately, because that is the first step. It's just like that observation and that noticing, because a lot of it is subconscious. We don't even realize it's happening or we're doing it. And so it is a practice, it's like a daily practice. And you have to just, and you'll notice it right away. Like once you start, you're like, oh my gosh, here I go again. Even the way you speak to your family, like, oh, we can't afford that. Like, oh, mommy, can I get this toy? No. Why no? Okay, we can't afford that. Or, money doesn't grow on trees, or that's too expensive. Like, the way we speak to our children is so important, because I am always so hyper aware. It's so funny every time I speak to them about I'm going to give you inherited money block trauma. Oh, I am so and so my, so it's really interesting and challenging to say, how do you create boundaries when you want to use language that's really positive and doesn't create that? And at the same time, wow, all the language that we've learned is so negative, right?
Yes. And like a week ago, I caught myself really going deep down that hole with my son, who just wanted to buy. I'm sorry, if you guys have teenagers, you know what pimple patches are, and they're ruling my life. They're all over the floors. They're all over the bathrooms. They're like these little patches you put on your face that cover up pimples and hide them. Oh, my son wanted to buy these patches. And I'm like, you know what? I've already bought 3 boxes in the last month. They're $15 each. And I was getting all into this thing about how expensive they are. And I could see him shrinking, right? I could see him like, well, okay, well, how about this one? And I realized in the moment, I had my inner observer show up and this is my old money wounds. As a young person, I floated checks in my 20s, right? I worked for $8 an hour as a counselor. I was a bleeding heart. And so for me, I really still to this day, I'm constantly up against my old money stuff, constantly. And I catch it when you said that about the kids. I just kind of resonated pretty fiercely, because it was just last week that I was having this whole thing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm doing it too.
No, but kids are the best teachers for that stuff, because it's all coming up all the time, every single day, and they question, and they don't just take no for an answer. They really need to understand why no, and so that's really, it's hard, because also you don't want to raise spoiled brats who have no concept of that energetic exchange, or also the impact, the societal impact, the environmental impact. And so, that's something that I talk about with my kids, you don't need to use the 20 squares of toilet paper that you just bunched up for number one, right? Right. And because we get the Charmin Extra, the super cushy Charmin, that's half a tree.
Yes.
Just wad it up, and you're not, so instead of how much that cost me at Costco, child? Toilet TP is expensive. It's more oh, think about the where this paper, what is this paper coming from? And I need that much of it. And it's oh no, actually I don't. Never occurred to me, right?
Right. I don't know where I could go with pimple patches.
Reusable ones.
Yeah. Masha, it has been so amazing talking to you. I mean, we'll do this again sometime, hopefully, because I love talking to you. I could talk to you for hours. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, this was so fun. Thank you,
Yay.
Michelle.
I want to just take a moment. I've already mentioned your podcast in the introduction. It'll all be in the show notes, but I just want to ask you before we close, if there's anything you want to say about how people can work with you or anything you want to share.
Well, I will say that definitely come check out the podcast. And I have a really fun episode 2 is all about money blocks and the secret about money blocks. So that's really great to check out. And also, if you are an online entrepreneur or business owner, check me out. Michelle is in my program, Hey to 100K, which is an amazing mastermind of entrepreneurs around the world. And it's really like we have created that sisterhood in that container, speaking of like the sister wound. And it's really powerful what can happen when you feel supported by a collective of women and you feel like really lifted up and held. So definitely something to check out if you're looking for that space and if you're looking to get out of your own head and out of your own self-sabotage.
Yeah, it is full of just kind, beautiful, soulful people, women. I love it. So great. All the stuff will be in the show notes to reference for Masha. And thank you so much, Masha. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Into the Work Therapy for Empaths and Seekers. Don't forget to grab your free gift, your Shadow Work Transformation Bundle at michellepoverman.com. I've included everything you need to get started to break through the patterns of self-sabotage and finally start to heal the parts of yourself that are getting in the way of truly reaching your potential. From a powerful meditation designed to help you meet and embrace your shadow self, to the guide that's full of curated prompts and important questions to support you on this journey. This really can be the work for you to unmask the root cause of all the issues you've been experiencing, honestly, and start to feel free to believe in yourself and go for what you want. The link for this free bundle is in the show notes. And if you like this episode, I would be so grateful if you could take a moment and rate, click and follow, and leave a review. Of course, you can always follow me on socials at Michelle Poverman. And keep in mind, as you embark on your journey from spark to brilliance, remember, the universe is always conspiring in favor of your awakening. Everything that's happening is in support of you lighting your own fire within. So until we meet again, may your path be well lit and your heart be guided. Shine bright, seekers, until next time.